Hello and welcome. My name is Chris Can. I'm here with Polymetal Investor Relations Director Evgeny Monakhov to talk about sustainability linked finance over a two-part series. Evgeny, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We're going to start with the climate focus in the first part here. You've recently published some near and longer term targets for emissions and a climate strategy. How did you come to arrive at those specific targeted numbers and that policy?
Well, it's been a very long and winding sort of road to the announcement we made in April about decrease in greenhouse emissions by 30% on a relative basis by 2030, and by 15% by 2025. In the absolute terms, we will reduce greenhouse emissions by 35% between 2019, this is the base year, and 2030. It took us more than 18 months to come to this program, and we based our approach on science-based targets worked out by the Paris Agreement, by sort of the recommendations of IPCC, and the best sort of industry standards. We also relied on what is realistically feasible and achievable, what we actually can vouch we can do and we can commit that we can do. We didn't include any sort of blue sky, moonshot kind of technologies in this calculation. So that's where the basis of our calculation came from, and we have come out at the end of April with those targets.
Okay, and you've done work leading into that 18-month process for these targets around renewable energy. A lot of your operations are very remote, obviously, and you've spent a fair bit of time investing in different scenarios for powering those. How important is that when it comes to achieving the targets that you've now set down?
Well, it's the key. It's the paramount importance where your assets are located. If you are lucky enough to be next door to a hydro powered plant, then your problems are essentially solved. You just connect to that grid, and that's it. We have not been that fortunate. Our operations indeed are located in some remote places in Russia, where no sort of grid connections are feasible or possible or economically viable. So we understood that some of our locations will benefit from connecting to the grid, and we are working on that. Nezhda, our big project in Yakutia, which is coming online in November of this year, will be connected to the grid. Albazino, another asset in the Khabarovsky region of Russia, also is slated for connection sometime in 2024. But for places like Omolon and Mayskaya, which are fairly remote, or Svetla, it's going to require installation of renewable sources of power. We have been exploring wind and solar. We've come to the conclusion that probably for our locations and for our specific requirements for power, solar is the one that we will be benefiting most, and we have a plan of rolling out more than 30 megawatts of installed capacity of solar in the next 4 years.
Okay, and what about complementary investments? Is it all about renewables, or are there things you're looking at in terms of EV haulage?
Yeah, of course. I mean, basically, there are three big sort of drivers for reduction of your emissions. It's you can either connect to the grid, but if the grid is clean, then that's your number one choice. Number two is installation of renewable sources of power. Number three is electrification of your fleet, mining equipment, trucks and excavators. We are working on that. We have already some pilot machines working in our sites. We have a joint venture with a German manufacturer of mining equipment called Scharf, where we work with them together in developing equipment that will work well for us. So that's the third big push. And then there are smaller but also quite important things that you do to reduce your carbon emissions. It's introduction of various optimization technologies, and how to manage the fleet better, and how to manage the equipment better to reduce the fuel consumption and as a result emissions. We've got a big reforestation project where we'll be planting an area of the size of Manhattan over the next 2-3 years in the Far East. That also will sort of offset our emissions. So these are the sort of the three main areas where we aim to reduce emissions, and then there are additional areas where they will account probably for about 10 to 15% of reduction, but the bulk of it, 85%, is those three main pushes.
Okay, and obviously at the moment we're talking essentially around Scope 1 emissions. Investors and lenders are very keen to see companies looking down the value chain and up the value chain around Scope 3. It's not the same as it would be if you're an iron ore producer. Clearly, gold is benefits in that respect. But what's your approach to Scope 3? Is it something that you consider, but you're reluctant to set targets, or is it something that at some point you could see yourselves putting down some firm targets around?
It's in process. By the end of next year, by November of 2022, we will have a Scope 3 emissions target published. So it's work in progress right now. As you said, as a gold producer, we would look in a better light than an iron ore producer or an oil producer.
Evgeny Monakhov, thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.